Hi BookTube, and welcome to a new video. It's the end of my Friday reads by talking about Ali Smith's Spring. Yes, I'm in the same garb as I was for the video that I recorded a minute ago. I shall probably edit both of these and upload both of these today, although I might leave Spring till tomorrow, Saturday, but whatever. Okay, so this is the third in the quartet. I was avowedly undecided about autumn and winter, and I said when I hauled this that this was make or break for this trilogy. If I was as bamboozled by the end of this, that I wouldn't even bother going on to read summer, which is perverse because you've read three out of the four. Why wouldn't you read the fourth? But I don't have to worry about it because for me this is the strongest of them by far. She has a very fragmented, fractured sort of style. But here that absolutely holds together to create a whole in a way I was less convinced that the other two did. Um, so what is it about? It's again, it does sort of have a theme of sort of Brexit and the nastiness and closed-mindedness that Britain seems to have fallen into with the whole Brexit vote and our attitude towards migrants and basically incipient racism. Let's not hold back on this. And it's a story about migrants and particularly a detention centre for those migrants who have been deemed not having a right to stay, and they are detained in these centres until they are returned from where they came. And what's really strong about the book is some of the characters and the relationships. So section one starts off with a filmmaker and his relationship to his female scriptwriter. They sort of came to prominence in the 1970s when in the UK you had this thing called Play for Today on TV, which were sort of plays written by playwrights, but they were put on TV and they were stupendous. You had playwrights like Trevor Griffiths with his play Comedians, Dennis Potter with his play Brimstone and Treacle. So top work, and you would never have this program today in the the two things. You get things like Breaking Bad and The Wire and things, which are great TV drama, but there's no metaphysics about them at all. There really isn't. Whereas with these 70s dramas, there was, they were much more sort of resonant about the human condition, much less sort of, specific context of, life on Baltimore, drug dealing streets, or Breaking Bad, the guy who's dying of cancer and deals drugs or whatever. So this, and I remember this from the 70s, so I suppose it sort of touchstones with me. Not in a nostalgic way, but it's something I can recall, and it's a beautifully drawn relationship. He is, he's very much second to her. She's the creative drive. Her wordplay, how she sort of spars and parries with him. He can barely keep up. She's much more well read, much more literate, and he's gone to her with they're no longer working together, and she's dying, of a terminal illness. But she's still really spunky and feisty, and their relationship is great, and she's a great character. He's gone to her because he was going to make this film on Rainer Maria Rilke, the German poet, and Catherine I've forgotten her name. Yeah, I think it was Catherine Mansfield, who coexisted in proximity in Switzerland, in Mansfield's case for taking the healthy water, mountain air and spa waters or whatever for her tuberculosis. But there's no evidence they ever met, and it's about sort of great art emerging from a sort of nowhere place, the sort of randomness of that. But his new script writer is it's Hollywoodizing it, and turning it into a great romance between these two characters who never met, and he's appalled. So he goes to his old scriptwriter who's dying, and he just sort of wants some advice, really. So that section one is beautiful, and there's lots of clever resonances to the dislike of immigrants and all of that without being overt. It's very subtly fed in. Then section 2 is the bit in the detention centre where we get it from the viewpoint of one of the female wardens or guards, for want of a better word, from a private security service that run this detention centre. And the problem is, even though I think a lot of the incidents that are relayed in here are true, because, you know, in the acknowledgements, the one thing that Smith spells out specifically is thanks to all the people who gave her insight into these detention centres. So, you know, I'm not saying they're true. They're not true. I think they absolutely are. But because they're presented to us from the viewpoint of someone with, you know, policing the system, we, you know, it's hard to it sounds crazy, but they are so sort of callous and offhand. You know, one of the incidents is a Kurdish man is on hunger strike for being denied his rights, and one of the prison guards puts an empty bowl outside this guy's door and sort of saying, "Oh, you can't fool us. This bowl's empty. You've been secretly stealing food." So there's lots of really nasty, you know, it is torture. You know, it's psychological torture by these guards who have nothing but contempt. And even though the guard whose eyes we view for is you know, not quite so horrific, but it's quite clear. You know, we've been introduced to the viewpoint and the political position of these guards. So clearly they are, you know, they come over as caricatured. You know, even if they are absolutely spot on, because it's so clearly presented, there's no ambiguity, there's no light and dark. These people are horrible, they're torturers. It's very hard to sort of feel the sympathy for the oppressed and for the migrants, because it's sort of cartoonish. That's the problem. As I say, even though those cartoons are probably absolutely true, it comes over as cartoonish because of the perspective that we're shown from. So that second section is really unsatisfactory. But into this comes a 12-year-old girl who's a catalyst character, who shakes up the detention centre. She went to a brothel run by sort of gangsters, and, you know, age 12, you know, incredibly vulnerable. She could have been snatched up and put to work in the brothel, but she had, you know, again, she sort of turned it upside down because people don't see her. You know, how does she pass all the security to get into the migrant detention centre? Well, no one sees her. She is sort of an invisible girl. Wise before her years. She has a catalysing effect, as did the Croatian character in Spring, whose name I've currently forgotten. And she's, you know, on the one hand, she's clearly too intelligent for a 12-year-old girl, but also there's an element of she's a much older being in a 12-year-old's body. But she's a fantastic character. So we've had the fantastic pairing relationship in the first part, and we've had this 12-year-old girl who basically hooks up with this security guard whose perspective we've been given, and then they go off on a jaunt up to Scotland. As does the filmmaker once his scriptwriter friend has died. So they coincide in part 3. The problem with part 3 is the filmmaker, without his sidekick, isn't interesting anymore. He's dull. He's self-indulgent. He's not interesting. The interesting thing is the relationship of the girl and the security guard. And I'm not going to spoil it for you, but this is where we get much more full on about sort of the history of immigration and of racism and of nationalism and all these sorts of things. It's, you know, part 1 was great. Part 2 I didn't enjoy until the girl came through. Part 3 was sort of back at the level of part 1, but it's a bit more hit and miss because it was very, you know, some of in its fragmentedness, some of that worked really well, was really art, you know, demonstrates Smith's artistry, and some of it fell flat. Some of it seemed a bit sort of shoehorned in, and we were getting Smith's politics sort of spoon-fed to us. But for all that, overall, I thought this was a far superior book to Spring and to Autumn. No, sorry, to Autumn and Winter, because it was more coherent. It's clearer what its message would be, even if its message sometimes was a bit heavy-handed. I actually preferred that than the sort of diffuse message of Autumn and Winter. It had more good, you know, there's one good character in each of the other two books. Here there is one great relationship between two characters, Another great character in the little girl, and even some of the relationship of the prison guard and the girl it was quite satisfying as well. So this was just as I say, of the three so far, I like this the most. Interesting, there are no visual artists. Smith is always talking about some painter or other or sculpture person, but in here it isn't. It's Rilke and Mansfield. Um, so there you have it. I would definitely recommend this. Well, it's a bit hard to recommend it because either you're an Annie Smith fan already or you're not. If you're an Annie Smith fan, you're going to read this anyway. I would recommend this, but if you haven't read out the other two, it's kind of hard to recommend this. Not because you need to have read them, but just placing it in context with the other two, I think is probably quite important. But the good news for me, if not for you, is that I'm definitely going to read Summer because I got enough out of this. Okay, so till next time, thanks very much.